Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage.
Hey, I'm back. It's Halloween time, early October. I'm such a fan of Halloween. I like it better than my birthday. I like it better than Christmas, any other holiday. So last year I did a Halloween video showing the stuff that I listened to get me in the mood for the season, and what I listened to pretty much from early October, if not late September, all the way through November. I don't want Halloween to... ooh, there's a big dog outside. Wow, I wonder if you guys can hear that. Wow, I've never heard a big dog like that out here. I mean, people have dogs in my condo complex. Maybe it's not a dog. Maybe it's a werewolf. Wow, sounds like it's right in front of my garage, too. It's not. There's a street right past there that people walk their dogs past. Wow, maybe it's a demon. Maybe it's a... Oh, my God. Can you hear that? People's dogs here are usually very well behaved, and the larger dogs you rarely hear bark. I've been here 4 years. I don't think I've ever heard a large dog bark. I've seen people walking them, but the larger ones are pretty mellow. God, that's scary. I hope you heard some of that. I have to keep this video under 8 hours, otherwise I have to pay the cameraman overtime. I got such a huge stack, and I've only got a couple LPs, and I showed these on my last video, but I just want to be inclusive. Ghost Stories, which I bought in the LP era, and this Lights Out that I showed last time too, with the witch's tail on the back. That's I think that might be it for my Halloween themed vinyl. I don't have a lot of it. Both of those albums I did actually put in my whatchamacallit, in my folder. So they're in one of my folders that I'm going to try to remember in my comments section to reference, so you can experience those albums. And I'm not, most of the music and the CDs and stuff I'm going to show, I'm not really sure that very much of it is around on YouTube. However, some of it is. If you have, I get excited because in a few days, my cable TV station, like most of you guys, whether you realize it or not, may have the radio channels on your cable TV stations. You know, they have like a country one and 80s rock one and all that stuff. I never listened to them all year at all, except for the one channel called Sounds of the Seasons, which changes with the seasons. So at Christmas time, they play Christmas music. But for about 3 weeks in October, they do play Halloween music. And, you know, a lot of it is the kinds of things that you would expect, you know, Purple, People Eater, Monster Mash, you know, the fun, silly songs. But they do mix in some instrumental soundtrack music and stuff like the theme from Psycho and the theme from Halloween and Tubular Bells and all that kind of stuff. So it's a nice mix, and it's called Music Choice, and it's on throughout the country. So it's dependent on whether or not your cable company may or may not pick up on it. They may pick up on it, and that would be certainly worth. It's fun. They have little factoids come up while the music's playing, facts about Halloween and the traditions of Halloween and when it started and all that kind of stuff. So I actually even record them on my DVR from year to year. I've got, I don't know, 20, 30 hours of it from last year still on my DVR. I got a lot of CDs to show here. Several different categories of CDs, and to the best of my ability, I'm going to try to explain the differences. There's a lot of Halloween CDs that feature remakes or the original versions of the songs like from Rocky Horror and, like I said, Purple People Eater, Monster Mash, all those kind of things. I don't really have any of those. They're pretty easy to hear, and it's a lot of what gets played on the Music Choice Sounds of the Season channel. So my stuff I choose to listen to, because I hear so much of that on the cable TV Halloween station. So the stuff that I choose to listen to is stuff that they're not going to play as much. And I don't have a lot of these. I think there's only one I have of these. And I can't say exactly why I bought this knowing what it was. It's just, the kind of sound effects and the moans and the dungeon of torture and the demonic demons and the werewolf forest, and basically sound effects that would go, probably made more to accompany trick-or-treaters and a haunted house setting. I must have gotten it cheap, but this is the only one of those types of things I have. And I have a lot of things that I love. They're silly, I know. A lot of ghost stories. A lot of these are meant for kids, but you know what? I'm a big kid at heart, and I love these. So a lot of these are people reading horror stories. And a lot of them, though, the famous ones, like this one looks like it's pretty much all Edgar Allan Poe. Somebody's reading The Premature Burial, The Pendulum, Telltale Heart, and then they add on, at the end, they actually add on from another CD, because this is a reissue, lunatic laughter and sound effects and things like that. But I really bought it for the stories, which I love. And here's another stories one. These are all stuff. I'm trying to. These aren't in order, so I'm trying to kind of put them in order as I do this. Here's another one, Tales from the Tomb. I don't know if you can see his eyes kind of glow there, but the glare makes it real hard to see. This one, even though it does have The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, there's a lot of original horror stories on this one. So it's a little less predictable. So that's fun too. And I just love these. And I'll tell you what those things are great for. They're great for driving around the car if you're ever working late at night, or you have to go somewhere by yourself late at night and you're driving home. This is the best thing to listen to in this season, the ghost stories, or even the music. But the ghost stories are just they're a trip anyway. Here's a little one. I bought this not knowing what it was, The Night in the Haunted House, The Night in the Graveyard. It's kind of just a descriptive thing. Somebody enters a haunted house and you hear a bunch of narrator telling you that, we're entering a haunted house, and then there's a bunch of sound effects fitting in with that theme. Dungeons, the Hounds of Hell, Bats in the Belfry, entering the graveyard, Witch's Mausoleum, blah blah blah. So that's only slightly better than the just plain sound effects. Oh, here's an earlier version of one of the CDs I already showed with the Edgar Allan Poe stories. This one just called Halloween's Greatest Stories. This is the same stories as the earlier one I showed you, just without the sound effects at the end. This was an earlier K-Tel compilation from 1994. I thought it was actually older than that. But Edgar Allan Poe's Premature Burial, The Pendulum, Telltale Heart, all those kind of classic stories. And then we get to some more silly but fun ones. This is just, I found this, this is just a cardboard sleeve. I think I found this on Amazon. Around the Fire with Uncle Guts. Well, that's going to tell you, it's a little bit kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's stories. It's about 46 minutes worth of stories. Original stories told by this guy, Uncle Guts, a little silly. Somebody bought this, actually, as a result of me showing this one year. The Monkey's Paws on here. Well, you know what? There's all well-known stories on here, too. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, The Hitchhiker, The Story of Count Dracula. Just, fun, silly stuff. Another one, definitely in the same category as Uncle Guts, is The Old Grey Goose. Very much tongue-in-cheek guy telling his stories about the medical colleges and Oscar the Light-Headed Pumpkin. Definitely tongue-in-cheek. 1999. These I thought I had a lot longer than that. Silly stuff, but stuff that I love. I love it. I love a lot silly stuff. I'm trying to do this in some kind of order, but it's not easy because I didn't put them in order. And now there's actually a series of books. These are seriously done. Multi-disc sets. These are two discs, almost 2.5 hours. Classic by the Naxos label, which is a kind of like a really well-known, very good budget classical music label. And all of the series of the classic Chilling Tales are basically real books, and these are pretty much read by either British or Australian actors. They're very professionally done, very, very seriously done. And they do classic stories by Charles Dickens, Ambrose Bierce, M.R. James, Edgar Allan Poe. And they've got at least, I want to say, 4 volumes of these. And each volume is 2 discs. And just filled, they're all about 2.5 hours. And they're all, not all the stories are that well known, but they're all published books, serious books, and written 100 years or so ago, and just fairly long stories too. So you have to have some time to really sit and listen to them, and they are read and acted out by these various actors that do them, and they're great. They're very, very professional, very well done. Not at all like a tongue-in-cheek thing at all. Here's the first volume. This one is read by a young Irish actor, and this is over 2.5 hours. So it's another bunch of Edgar Allan Poe, O. Henry, M.R. James, Rudyard Kipling stories. So those are for fans of, like, you really want to seriously sit down and listen to a story kind of things. Then I have old radio shows, broadcasts of, here's one, Lights Out, which is the same program that I showed on that album. It's a different episode, but hopefully you can read it, from 1942 and 1943. This is on the Radio Spirits label. So there's a lot of old radio programs that are really kind of neat that I have as well. Here's another. I actually bought this one first, The Werewolf and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. These are, again, stories from the radio from 1944 and 1945. So I guess at Halloween time, back then, people didn't have televisions. So, they would sit around the radio and hear these stories. And I actually have a box set that I bought then. So I have actually another copy of the Werewolf one. This was in the box set as well as me buying it individually. So here's another one with the story, 2 different stories of Frankenstein read on the radio again from 1944, and another version of Frankenstein from the radio from 1955. Again, this company's called Radio Spirits, and I just noticed that they're in New Jersey, Cedar Knolls, New Jersey, which is not anywhere near here. And also in the same set is Dracula, which must be a very long reading because it's the only story on here, from 1938. 1938. Wow. You know, it's kind of incredible in a way that somebody thought to preserve these stories, the tapes that these are actually the acetates or whatever they put these things on. Because who would have thunk, you know, that there would be an audience for them all these years later. Here's, I remember getting this, but I don't remember buying it. Classic Tales of Horror, which again is fairly seriously done stories by Robert Bloch, the author. The Ray Bradbury story on here. This is 3 unabridged CDs, so the stories are fairly long in a lot of these. One story is 48 minutes, one's 49 minutes. Like I said, there's about 3.5 hours on here. Company called PhoenixBooksandAudio.com. Juliette Mills is one of the actresses that reads the stories on here. Robert Forster, people that I know anyway. Susan Anspach, which I know her. She's an actress from the 70s. And the list price for 3 CDs, over 3.5 hours worth of music, is $9.95. That's probably fantastic. This is a good, you know, this is a good car. This is good for car rides, you know. And you know, I've shown this stuff before, but nobody's going to go back and watch my old videos, except very few people. And here's a whole series put out by this company that I can't find any information about on the internet, and I don't know that they're still around at all, called Blue Diamond Audiobooks. Very professionally recorded, a bunch of CDs all in these cardboard cases. And I never saw these in any kind of record store or anything. I didn't even find them on Amazon. Oddly enough, I used to, when I had a job, I used to have a habit of always going into the various Halloween stores. And there's one called the Party Box or Party City. They're 2 different stores that basically do the same thing. And what they do is, for Halloween, they sell costumes and all kinds of decorations for your house, and you know, the fog makers for Halloween, and all Halloween stuff. Not the same as like Spirits. There's a bunch of stores called Spirits now, which are strictly pretty expensive Halloween decorations and animated kind of things. These Party Box stores are a bit more on the budget side of things. And you know, all set up for like party favors and Halloween modes, and they do have, like I said, Halloween costumes and lots of, you know, Halloween decorations, but not the kind of expensive stuff that some of these stores sell. And at Halloween, for about 2 years, I started just seeing they would just stick them any place where they had a space on a rack for them. These little cardboard story things by Blue Diamond Audiobooks, Classic Tales of Fear. All professionally read, all stories that, you know, are very famous. The Raven, Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Each one of these discs has two stories on there. And they used to sell, I got a sticker on some of these for what they cost. $1.99, $2.99 tops. I ignored the for kids part. And this was an Ambrose Bierce story, The Bottle Imp by Robert Louis Stevenson, which neither one of the stories on here had I ever heard before. And honestly, they're not really necessarily for kids. I mean, these were spooky stories written by professional authors at a time when they didn't specifically make them for young kids. Another famous story, another Blue Diamond audiobook, another Ambrose Bierce story, The Damned Thing, which is something I had never heard before, and The Monkey's Paw, which is a fairly famous story. These are great. I've long ago copied these into my computer in MP3 format, put a whole bunch of these on an MP3 disc, where I had probably 7 or 8 of these on an MP3 disc, just like 8 hours of these stories. These things were definitely worth the $1.99, $2.99 I paid for them. So it was $1.99. These were all new. The Night Wire. This is one of my favorite ones. I love that story. And a story called Rats by M.R. James. Most of these stories I hadn't heard before, and the ones that I hadn't heard are actually the most fun. Now the date on this one, and actually a lot of these is 2005, so they're not ancient, but wow, good luck finding them now. I never even saw Amazon selling them, which is kind of surprising. This is Blue Diamond Audiobooks. I don't know what the company is. There's another name on here, PC Treasures Incorporated. Again, I don't know if that's a company that exists anymore. Here's an H.P. Lovecraft story, which I love Lovecraft. And another one by Robert W. Chambers called The Yellow Sign. Another one from 2005. Boy, these, I tell you, these to me have just been so much fun. And I gotta admit, you know, if I just want to get into the Halloween spirit, it's not really Halloween season. These are great way to do it too. Another M.R. James story on here, and something called Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and stories that I didn't know before, which is really fun. Another one from 2005, so it looks like these all came out 2005. But even a few years after that, I couldn't find any reference to them online. Vincent O'Sullivan and an Edgar Allan Poe story. The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar. A story by Edgar Allan Poe I've never heard of. Again, from 2005. I don't know where they sold it. Apart from these party stores, I don't know where you would have ever found these. Classic Tales of the Undead, Dracula's Guest by Bram Stoker, the guy that wrote the original Dracula novel. And one called The Grave by Guy de Mosfot. I don't know how to pronounce the Frenchman's name that wrote this, but he's fairly well known as, I guess, kind of like a horror writer. Did a lot of stories that are in these various audio CDs of ghost stories. These things are just so much fun. I wish they were around when I was a kid, but when I was a kid they didn't have electricity yet either, so I guess that's one of the reasons why they didn't exist. Here's a one that I found online that was sold just off of some website that I don't think I've seen anywhere else, called Charleston's Tales of Terror. What I think this is I believe that there's a tour in Charleston that one can go to, Charleston, South Carolina, because there's actually, right on the CD, there's actually kind of like a plug for the walking tours with Tommy Doo in Charleston, South Carolina, with a phone number. So I'm thinking that this is something that is probably, when you go on the walking tour, they probably have little souvenir type of things that they sell, and this might be one of them for the walking tour, and they decided, well, let's just put it up for sale on the internet and see if anybody bites, anybody's interested, that, because I've never gone to Charleston on the walking tour, but I guess this is something that they kind of talk about these sites a little bit, but these are mostly not so much. Well, I don't know if I don't recall right now if they're geared toward that specific area of South Carolina. They're definitely ghost stories. But, things like this are quite a find, because this is really kind of like a small town, homemade, regional type of thing. And another fun one. Now, here's the one, though. To me, this is the Halloween CD. If I was going to put one on display, that kind of gives the vibe of the season, and one that I've gotten a lot of spins off of, if not the most spins off of, which is just, I found this a number of years ago. This is out of print now, but I believe you can find copies around Ghost Gallery, which is by All Stories. I believe the stories were written by the guy that performs them, which is a guy named Tom Willett, who is right on YouTube. with a channel called Feature Man, who puts tons of videos up. He was an actor, mostly retired from acting now. He puts up cooking videos, videos of financial advice, videos of him playing piano. He's a good piano player, plays oldies sometimes, shoots video, does some really silly, fun videos of things like how to eat a watermelon. A really, really nice guy. Been it was show business for a long time. And I emailed him about this because I couldn't really find much information about it after I bought it. This came out in 1995, and I've been listening to it annually since then. It's just a bunch of ghost stories that I believe Tom wrote, and there's some underlying electronic, like synthesizer music, playing underneath that I verified with Tom that he played as well. He did the music. But it was actually he was paid to do this by a record label. This wasn't like a self-produced record label. He wrote the music, he did the narration, I believe he wrote the stories, but he was actually paid by a record label to create this. This is fun. If you could find this, just a whole bunch of short original stories that are just a whole lot of fun. And now we're on to music. No, I got one more. One more story thing. This is not a Halloween CD, but and I got mixed in here a whole bunch of things that aren't Halloween specific, but to me they are Halloween, simply because somehow I made a mental association with Halloween with these various CDs, and I always play them in the Halloween season, and I have them in my Halloween stacks of stuff. So even though there's no real Halloween content, and it's not really specific to Halloween, and one of them is this Donald Schmidt, who I guess is a fairly well-known like UFO reporter and investigator in that world, did this kind of narrative. It's almost like a news report, really, just on audio CD about the documentary about the UFO crash at Roswell, and this is a whole lot of fun. There's I believe there's little snippets of interviews with people from the time of what they saw, very old, from old news reports and all that. You can kind of hear the crackling audio. And this came out in 97. This is a whole lot of fun. But again, this is something you want to pretty much pay attention to and devote time to. And if you're on a long kind of trip, it's best to listen to, because this is, I think, way over an hour. And it's just a fun thing. It's not Halloween specific, but to me it's got that association, so I always end up listening to it at Halloween. Now, going on to music, I got a couple original music things here. There's a lot of music that is to be expected, but here, this is really an original thing. I think I found this on Amazon, called Music from Castle Dracula. I don't know if this is a put on or not. The people that made this album, there's very little information here as to when it was recorded or anything. But it's really kind of neat, very original gypsy music played on acoustic instruments, violins, and that kind of thing. Not classical, but it kind of sounds like a small gypsy ensemble. They claim that it was actually recorded in the Carpathian Mountains, which would be Transylvania, which is where the real Dracula, the guy who the fictional character was based on, where he came from. And the music is actually really interesting and intentionally a bit haunting. There's a lot of reverb on the music, the way they recorded it. So it kind of sounds like it's coming from the back, like you're standing at one end of the castle, and there's this acoustic band of gypsies kind of playing at the other end of a hallway, and you hear all the echoing. The music is very, very cool. Nice instrumentation. There's some reading while the music happens, just about on each track on here, and there's about 10 tracks? 9 tracks. There's reading from the actual novel of Dracula from Bram Stoker, so it kind of diverts your attention a little bit when a narrator comes on while the music's playing, and then he stops reading, and then it goes back to just music for a while. But it's really, very original, very interesting, and the music is very kind of neat. I wouldn't say exactly spooky, but it fits the mood. Here's another album of original music by a group called the Halloween Ensemble. There's no members listed in there, called The Classical Halloween Haunting. And it's pretty much like a group of classical string players. I get the feeling that these are probably a group of musicians, definitely professional musicians, probably guys that are employed in a symphony orchestra in some state somewhere, probably in the U.S., and they kind of, in their free time decided to make an album of kind of classical string music and call themselves the Halloween Ensemble, but there's no members listed, no recording dates. There's no listing as to who wrote the compositions, and I can't tell whether they're classical, famous classical compositions or not. None of them are things that stand out as being very, very well-known classical compositions. So it's a little bit mysterious, but the music is unique. Like I said, I don't recognize any of the tunes on here from the classical world, which doesn't mean they're not from the classical world, but they're not the more obvious ones, like the ones that have been used over the years in say, a lot of movie soundtracks. So this was a nice diversion, something that's a little bit different. It was hard for me to pick, to whatever extent you can hear the music in the background here. This is the CD that I'm playing. It's hard because I tried to put up some of the CDs with music on here last year, and the copyright got them taken down. So even these really, really old classical pieces you can't necessarily put up to here. Now there's this company called, they go by a couple different names, but the main name is Drew's Famous. And Drew's Famous puts out these budget CDs for things like kids' parties and Halloween and Christmas and all that. They seem to have, well, I don't look for other seasons, but they seem to have a lot more for Halloween than the rest of the year. And what they do is pretty much exclusively cover versions. It's a budget kind of company. They put out cover versions of famous pop songs. They don't license the original tracks. They make their own. So I guess they got a lot of in-house musicians that they work with. And they do a whole bunch of CDs, for Halloween. And a good chunk, probably more than half of them are the same songs that you would expect, songs like the Time Warp from Rocky Horror, and the Monster Mashes and the Purple People Eater, and they do a lot of those as well. But they also do, and I'm a sucker and I'll buy them, even though they repeat a lot of the material. They kind of do compilations of compilations. But they do ones with movie music, movie themes, like the theme from Halloween and that kind of thing, and classical music that has gotten known through the decades from being used in horror movies. And this is one of them. Now, I don't know if there's, since all of their albums pretty much come from a set of musicians that they employ, but most of those are real budget things, like a couple of guys on a synthesizer, type of thing, and even the drums are synthetic and everything. So on these, when you have themes here like the Hall and the Mountain King and the Sorcerer's Apprentice and the Psycho Suite from Psycho, it sounds like real strings. I can't tell if it's a synthesizer or not. They're pretty good recordings, maybe not up to the standards of the originals, but they're pretty good recordings. And I don't know if they're actually hiring string musicians or whether they're using guys with a multitude of synthesizers to create this fairly sophisticated music. Overture from the Phantom of the Opera. They do the Twilight Zone theme. Funeral March of a Marionette, which is that theme song to the Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV show. The Dark Shadows theme. But, you know, classical stuff like Night on Bald Mountain and In the Hall of the Mountain King, which are things that appear on, like, tons and tons and tons and tons of Halloween CDs. Oh, just mixed in here. Here's a silly one. I bought this anyway. Kids Halloween, scary stories and spooky songs. Some original, this one is oriented very much toward kids. The Ghost with One Black Eye. And, you know, this is one of those kind of silly things I just bought to have. This is also on the Drew's Famous label, even though sometimes they go by this other title, DJ's Choice. I'm kind of interested in this Drew's company. I think they're also based in New Jersey. And I wonder if their CDs make it, you know, all the way over to the West Coast or not, you know, because they're based here. CDs are all over the place here, I know, when you go into like a Halloween store. This is one of the silly ones, but I had to have a couple silly ones. Here's another one from Drew's Famous, but they didn't use the Drew's Famous name, but it's the same company, same group of musicians that refer to themselves as the Hit Crew. But again, I don't know who's in the Hit Crew or how many people that really is. And there's like the theme from Rosemary's Baby, Tubular Bells, which, you know, they've got on a half a dozen or more of their Halloween compilations. The theme to Dracula, to Frankenstein. Again, Funeral March of Marionette, the Alfred Hitchcock Presents theme. I really like it. You know, people have really said they don't like their version of the Tubular Bells, the little 4-minute opening part of Tubular Bells that got used in The Exorcist, which is used on this CD as well. Here's a Drew's Famous one from that label that got me started on a label. This was one of the ones where there's 16 tracks on here, and on that Halloween music channel on my cable TV station, through the course of a day, they play almost every single one of these 16 tracks, which is the first thing that got me hooked on buying these Drew's Famous remakes. And these are all movie themes, all re-recorded, one from Friday the 13th, one from Nightmare on Elm Street, one from The Shining. Some of these are maybe a little thin, digital sounding synthesizer recreations. But I gotta admit, you know, from all the years of hearing something like Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, even Mike Oldfield's own re-recordings of Tubular Bells, I really like hearing somebody else's version. So even if the version doesn't live up to the original, and the version on here is done entirely on synthesizer, all the guitar parts and the bass parts and everything is on synthesizer, I really dig it, and it's fun. And it's one that gets a lot of plays on the Music Choice Halloween music channel on the cable system. But then others sound almost purely orchestral, so I can't tell what instruments are being used. Are they using synthesizers with really good sound samples, or do they actually hire string players to do things like the theme from Jaws, Silence of the Lambs? Some of these are very orchestral in nature. The Shining theme. They do the X-Files theme on here, the Prince of Darkness theme from the John Carpenter movie, which I really like. They do Blade Runner, a very cold digital version of Blade Runner that really works well because of the nature of the music. Having this real cold digital cutting sound really works. I really like the version of Blade Runner on here. And a really cool version of the theme song from The Exorcist 2, the movie which flopped, but I actually have the soundtrack to that from 1977. This is, you know, one of the signature Halloween CDs for me. You know, this as far as music goes, just because I don't want to skip over any of the 16 tracks. They're all pretty well done. They all get a ton of spins on the Music Choice cable TV channel, and I always love to hear them when they pop up on there. And to me, this and the Ghost Gallery are the ones that always kick off my seasonal Halloween season. Here's another one that's really well done. Again, by a different company, doing their own versions of a lot of the same songs. Nightmare on Elm Street, the theme from Jaws, the X-Files theme again, theme from Friday the 13th, theme from Poltergeist, a lot of the same material as the Drew's famous CDs. The Twilight Zone, Halloween, the John Carpenter movie theme, another different version of Tubular Bells, like the first 4 minutes or so, which I really, really dig. I love hearing alternate versions of that track in particular. And this is by, this one actually got a credit to a guy. This is from 1999. I think the guy's, I can't find it on here now, but I know probably inside this guy, Roy Shakid. Don't know if he couldn't be the only musician playing on here, but I guess he's like the leader of the band. Oh, and this is actually from the Laserlight Company, and I didn't even know that they were still around in 1999. Laserlight, very well known budget kind of company. So continuing on, I gotta move some stuff, guys. My stack is so big here. Or getting totally into just the music here. Here's another one from Drew's famous Fright Flicks. A lot of the same exact tracks as others, but they just kept on doing compilations on compilations here. But they always throw in a couple tracks that I didn't have somewhere else. Like this one has the Amityville Horror theme on there, but again it has that very, very kind of cool digital version of Tubular Bells. The Psycho theme again. This one throws in at a left field one vocal song which totally doesn't fit, and that's the Time Warp from Rocky Horror, which I absolutely hate. And one of the reasons why I kind of avoid a lot of those vocal Halloween CD compilations. But then again, they go back right to the instrumental music themes from Carrie, from Jaws, from Halloween, X-Files again, theme from Tales from the Crypt, I Know What You Did Last Summer, that kind of thing. As a matter of fact, I'm such a fan of these Drew's famous compilations that I actually have one that I ordered that I haven't received yet. So it's coming in the mail, so it won't be here in time for me to show it for this video, but I'll be doing videos before Halloween is out, and I might just show it then. Here's a real famous one that a lot of people that don't have a lot of Halloween stuff might still have. Mannheim Steamroller Halloween. Chip Davis. So, this one is something that there's a few tracks on here that also get played. Every year on the Music Choice Sounds of the Season channel, they play a lot. So Hall of the Mountain King gets a lot of plays. Night on Bald Mountain I love, but I don't think that one gets a lot of plays. There's a couple on here. I know, yeah, I don't know which ones, but I know there's 2 or 3 tracks that are played, hundreds and hundreds of times during the course of the Halloween season on the Music Choice Halloween channel. Here's another one by a completely different company, Madison Entertainment, who does mainly, I think, DVDs, and they kind of paired up a budget set of a DVD with the original black and white Night of the Living Dead movie, which is a public domain movie, so anybody can put out the movie without having to pay for it, for like licensing for it. So, which is why there's hundreds of versions of Night of the Living Dead out there from hundreds of companies. But they paired it with an audio CD performed by the 101 Strings Orchestra. Again, and these are different versions than the others I've shown, of horror movie theme songs like The Omen, Wolf. There's a few on here that I haven't seen in other places. The Shadow, Hellraiser, one of the Hellraiser movies. They do a bunch of music from Psycho, not just the shower scene, which is the one theme that everybody seems to do. Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween. Surprising that they do not do Tubular Bells on here. Yeah, so this is, and this is a real orchestra that does it, so that's kind of neat. You know, to try to do these in some kind of sensible order is a little difficult. Here's one that I really kind of, we're getting into now, serious classical music. Not so much movie themes. There's a lot of orchestral music that are movie themes on these that have been done through the years. Here's another one that fits into that theme. This is one from Reader's Digest. If people know Reader's Digest, the magazine is. Did this one called Fright Night, and this is also a lot of fairly well known. The Bach piece, the Toccata in D minor, and Night on Bald Mountain, and the Funeral March of the Marionettes, I think, is on here too. So it's a few serious classical pieces that have come to be associated with Halloween, mixed in with movie themes. So they do in the Hall of the Mountain King, but they do the Funeral March of Marionette, the Alfred Hitchcock Presents theme. They do Tubular Bells on here, but they do something from Harry Potter, one of the Harry Potter movies, and most of the other stuff. Dance Macabre, to me, that Dance Macabre, as far as classical Halloween music goes, is it. That is the piece. That is the demonstration, the number one on the hit parade for me of classical music that has come to be associated with Halloween. I love that piece, primarily because it was one of the first classical pieces I ever heard that I paid attention to when I was very young in grade school. And they showed a film of Dance Macabre with the whole idea behind the piece, even though instrumental, is supposedly on this one Halloween night a year, the spirits come out of the graves and they dance until the rooster crows in the morning, and then they all go back to their graves for the entire year until next year, until that one night a year. And that's the idea behind Dance Macabre, and that's how the instrumentation was chosen by the composer, trying to instrumentally give the feel of these dancing skeletons and ghosts and spirits and things. And just one of my favorite classical pieces. And there's a lot of recordings you'll see going toward, and these are really, in terms of music, I love those movie theme ones, but in terms of the music that I associate with Halloween, I got probably my favorite sub area would be these classical compilations of serious classical music that, for one reason or another, whether it was intentionally by the guy that created the music trying to convey something spooky, or doing an instrumental variation on and a lot of these classical composers, it seems, used a lot of folk tales that involved ghosts and witches to create these musical masterpieces of theirs, even though there's no words or anything or lyrics even in the original version of the classical compositions, but they took these stories as kind of a guideline of what they were trying to convey musically. So you have Dance Macabre on here again, Witch's Brew, which is a great compilation, Mussorgsky, Night on here is called Bear Mountain, but sometimes it's called Night on Bald Mountain. Fantastic piece. Baba Yaga, which is a Russian witch that the composer of the piece, basically, again, took the story of this Russian witch and tried to convey it musically. Berlitz, Symphonie Fantastique, Dream of a Witch's Sabbath. Debussy, there's a Debussy piece on here, which is odd because not too many places in Halloween kind of themed classical CDs have Debussy pieces on here. March to the Dwarfs by Grieg, Sorcerer's Apprentice, which is a big one, and Holst the Planets, which is a really big source of taking pieces and putting them on these Halloween CDs. Usually it's Mars. Usually it's the piece Mars, I think, because that's one of the darker pieces from the planets. But this one is Uranus, the Magician, oddly enough, they chose for this one. And there's a Liszt piece on here as well, subtitled Dance of Death. So you can see why that was chosen. That's Witch's Brew. And this is Witch's Brew, but a different Witch's Brew and a different label and different pieces. I love this, one of my favorite CD covers of all time. I just love that. That is just pure Halloween. The Tam O'Shanter Overture, which is, again, I think one of those classical pieces based on these folky tales that have some hint of the supernatural to them. Mussorgsky again, with Night on Bear Mountain, but also a portion of Pictures of an Exhibition, which is weird because I've never kind of really associated Pictures of an Exhibition with Halloween themes, and I don't know, maybe they have used a lot of Pictures of an Exhibition over the years in various like horror movies, especially early horror movies, as a theme, but it's not one that in my mind when I think of Pictures of an Exhibition I actually really associate with Halloween, and the pieces fit in definitely. Franz Liszt's Mephisto Waltz, which is a big one. There was even a movie by that title. Again, Funeral March of Marionette comes up on here, which again was the used as the theme for the Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And Faust's Ballet Music, which is one I've seen pop up on numerous compilations of these, so I guess that's also a piece that's associated with Halloween. They all fit the mood, there's no doubt about it. Oh, one called The Witch's Ride from Hansel and Gretel by Engelbert Humperdinck, the classical composer, not the easy listening singer. This is a really good CD, by the way. Buy that if you can find it. I think it's still in print. There's a whole bunch similar creepy classics. I actually tried to put this up online last year. I wanted everybody to have a really long, nice sampling of classical music for the Halloween season, and it got banned, and I'm really kind of surprised. This has Holst the Planets on here as well. This one has the Mars track, which is probably the darkest one, which is probably the one that you would think is the most obvious to put on here, you know, onto a Halloween collection of classical music. Dance Macabre's on here again, which is one of my favorite pieces. Night on Bald Mountain, as it's called here. The Mussorgsky piece, Night on Bald Mountain, which is called Night on Bear Mountain on some other places. Berlitz Symphonie Fantastique, Dream of a Witch's Sabbath. Sorcerer's Apprentice. There's a Stravinsky piece section from the Firebird Suite on here, which is not the most obvious choice. There's a Bartók piece on here. Bartók can get a little weird, so Bartók I think would be a really good source for people to use to make these classical compilations, but also for movie soundtracks. I'm surprised a lot more of his music wasn't used. And Grieg from the Peer Gynt Suite, Hall of the Mountain King once again. That one's used a lot, Hall of the Mountain King, which is again one of my favorites. Here's another one called Fright Night that has different versions, but a lot of the same pieces. The Mephisto Waltz. Oh, Charles Ives' Halloween, which is this weird little short, 2 or 3 minute piece. I'm surprised doesn't show up in a lot more of these. That's a really weird piece, very fitting, very cool. Introduced me to Charles Ives, who apparently was quite an odd fellow. From Holst, from the Planets, there's Mars on here. Wagner, Ride of the Valkyries, which is something very popularly used in that war movie that I can't think of the name of now, but it's a very famous piece. Berlitz's March to the Scaffold, The Witch's Ride again from Hansel and Gretel, the famous Bach Toccata from D minor, Toccata and Fugue, Sorcerer's Apprentice, Funeral March of Marionette again. You're seeing a theme. A lot of these pieces are on numerous CDs. Night on Bald Mountain again, here it's called Bald Mountain, and Dance Macabre again, which I can't get enough versions of Dance Macabre anyway. You can make an entire CD of just as many versions as you can fit of Dance Macabre in there, and I'd be thrilled. So now we get into a slightly different area with the last ones that I have to show. And that is CDs that aren't necessarily, and albums and music that are not aimed at being specifically Halloween kind, like all the others, like the Fright Nights and all that. Now, obviously, a lot of the music that was created for these was created before people even celebrated Halloween. But, you know, and later, these are all compilations from various sources, different orchestras. You know, these are recorded, you know, probably 70 years apart. Some of these things could come from the 1940s all the way up to the 2000s. So, you know, none of these classical albums were really created entirely for that CD release, for that album release. And then we come to a small group of CDs that I associate with Halloween that aren't marketed as being Halloween, and there's none of those familiar pieces on them, but for various reasons I associate them with Halloween. And one of them is Schoenberg. If you're familiar with Schoenberg's music at all, Schoenberg's music is pretty out there, pretty weird orchestral music. And when I first played this, I thought, wow, that's really weird. And then I found myself listening to this at Halloween time, mixed in with my other orchestral stuff. And so just over the years, I've come to associate it with Halloween. Here's another one, but this is almost cheating a little bit because it's the cover image, which is almost like I can't get the glare off it, almost like the perfect Halloween image, though there's no reference to Halloween. It kind of looks like it's a house, but there's like a black cat in the window up there, and it's obviously very dark. I love that cover. I love cartoony art like this. It's very much a Halloween cover, but there's nothing marketed about this in Halloween. This is simply an album with Mussorgsky's Pictures of an Exhibition on there, but also Night on Bear Mountain. So you've got Night on Bear Mountain, which is kind of associated over the years with Halloween, but you've got the full Pictures of an Exhibition, which is on its own a 31-minute piece, which again, I never really associated it with Halloween. But again, people were picking little sections of Pictures of an Exhibition and throwing them on those classical Halloween compilations. So, never the whole thing. But again, this isn't really sold as a Halloween thing, but with Night on Bear Mountain on here, which to me, when I hear it, I think Halloween, that piece by Mussorgsky, and simply for the cover image and the couple sections of Pictures at an Exhibition that did make it onto other classical compilations, to me this ended up becoming one of those CDs that I pull out and I listen to during the Halloween season. Here's another one. There's nothing Halloweenish about this cover because it's the orchestral conductor standing out in a field, and it's of Dvorak's music, and there's not much Halloween-like in much of Dvorak's music. The large part of the CD is a Symphony No. 8 by Dvorak, and there's nothing Halloweenish about that. But there's a piece on here called The Noon Witch, and it's only about 14 minutes, but I'll be damned if it doesn't work for me for Halloween. You know, orchestral piece. Again, I went and read the history on this. I'm a little bit surprised that The Noon Witch didn't end up on any of the classical compilations. Because it's a piece, even though it's instrumental, that Dvorak apparently read this story. I believe it was an old Russian kind of fairy tale story about a witch who appears and wants to take a woman's small child away. And he took this tale and he tried to create it musically. And through musical representation of the event of this witch appearing and attempting to take the child away and blah, blah, blah. And the music does the damn good job of reflecting that. And so, as a result, with the title and with the fact that it was very much based on that kind of thematic element, I just, boom, in my mind now it's, this is a CD that's a Halloween CD to me. I associate it with Halloween. Wouldn't you know it, I don't know where it is. One of the CDs that I have that I most associate with Halloween that I showed last year, and I took off my shelf and it's not here, is Manuel Gottsching's Dream and Desire, which is a soundtrack album. I believe it was a soundtrack album that didn't get released until a good 15 or so years after the music was made. I believe the music was made in around 1977, but didn't come out to the 90s. And there's basically 3 long tracks on that album. And I talked about this last year, and I pulled the CD, and it's not here, so I don't know where I put it. But Manuel Gottsching, who is Asherah Temple, but this one is under his own name, created this Dreams and Desire. I don't know why he didn't put it out for so many years. But when he eventually put it out, it's basically 3 very long tracks. One of them has this ghost sound, this woo, which basically to me sounds like a ghost, which goes throughout one entire track for about 25 minutes, while all this electronic synthesizer stuff goes on around it. And there's no reference to that sound representing a ghost or anything, but from the very first time I heard the track, I heard, oh, that sounds like a ghost, and I just pictured a ghost floating around. And the music's very electronic and a little bit on the darker side, so you kind of see this as like a night vision of a ghost floating around outside in my backyard by the old wooden fence kind of thing, and the trees being lit in the moonlight with no leaves on them and the bare branches reaching out in the sky, that kind of image. And so Dreams and Desire is always, to me, a Halloween album. It has nothing to do with Halloween. I'm sure that wasn't his intent on making that album or that track. But there is one track on there, a good 25-minute track, that has this shrill little sound effect that runs through the entire piece. And it always sounds like a ghost floating around to me. Now, another one in that same family, German electronica, or German electronic musicians, Berlin specifically, is Tangerine Dream's Green Desert. Now this is very unusual because usually when I get a title like that, Green Desert, desert's hot, it suggests heat. As soon as I see a cover image like that, and I see a title like Green Desert, I think and associate the album forever in my mind, especially since there's no lyrics to suggest anything different. I think, oh, heat, summertime, nothing to do with October and autumn and the cold or anything. Usually that would be enough in my mind that I would never associate this title or image with anything other than the heat in the summertime. Except it just so happens I had this CD for a number of years, and 10 or 12 years ago, amongst my Halloween listening, I got into playing this album. I had it for years. I put it on one night, 2 or 3 weeks before Halloween, and I really got into it. And it does sound a little bit ominous at times, no doubt about it. And then the next night, I found myself playing it again in my evenings mix. I would come home from work, and I would select about a dozen or so CDs to play for that night. And after I played this the first night, mixed in with various things I wanted to hear in my normal Halloween listening, I went and then I put this on. And then I wanted to hear it again the second night. And then the third night. Even though I had heard the album before and I was familiar with it, I had never gotten to a real thing of listening to it on a regular basis. I ended up listening to this album every night for at least a week and a half or so. And this is about 12 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago. And it just happened to be that it was during the Halloween season, and all the other stuff, or most of the other stuff I was listening to mixed in there, were the Halloween albums that I typically listen to. So what happened in my mind, all of a sudden, from that year on, I got association with Halloween with this album, even though the title and the cover art does not suggest anything about autumn weather or Halloween. But I guess if you think about it, Halloween time in the desert would still look like this anyway. But it does help that the music's kind of got a darker side to it, especially the first 5 or 6 or 7 minutes, which is just like this really sustained bass note drone that kind of these sound effects happen around. So there's a little bit of a darkness to some of the music on the album. But this is one that has there's nothing in the titles or anything. Green Desert, White Clouds, Astral Voyager, those tracks don't suggest anything, even one track called Indian Summer. To me, that would be enough in my mind to forever associate that with summertime, if it wasn't for that one year when it just happened to be Halloween time, when I put this album on and listened to it night after night after night, and it got this permanent association with Halloween. Now it's a Halloween album and I always play it. I don't think I showed this last time on the Tangerine Dream front, but last year, even though, again, these are some Tangerine Dream, like much later period albums that I had, I played these last year, possibly the year before, around Halloween time. And this is probably my newest edition because I don't get a lot of, of all the CDs I'm showing here, this is pretty much most of my Halloween associated music. And I don't add necessarily CDs to it every year. They happen more naturally. If I pick something up and it has those themes and it's specifically like a Halloween compilation classical CD. But I've got so many of these and I'm not finding a lot of new ones that I don't add on to the list every year necessarily. But I had these Tangerine Dream albums. Essentially, these are called Tangerine Dream, but they're Edgar Furesa solo albums. And he did one of these in early 2000s, and another one about 6 or 7 years later, called Chandra Part 1, The Phantom Ferry, which is it's all instrumental. It's marketed as a Tangerine Dream album, but it's Edgar Furesa solo. And Edgar kind of wrote up this fictional story about this guy who's like a satellite technician or something like that works alone in this kind of lonely, this lonely hilltop mountainous area where I guess he's like the technician for the satellite or something like that. I haven't read the story this year, and I should have in preparation. But this guy kind of works alone, and one night when he's at this kind of eerie location working his usual job at the satellite, he meets an alien. And this is just a fictional story that Edgar Furesa wrote to kind of accompany the music. There's no kind of narration or lyrics or anything. And he created this, for whatever reason, to be a multi-part thing. And he came out with this album and didn't follow it up for 6 or 7 years with a part 2, but you notice he used almost the same identical cover. And it was just a slight continuation of the story. Again, he mentioned this lonely technician at this spot out in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of nowhere. This guy that meets up with this alien presence. And there's no kind of conclusion to the story. The whole story is, maybe a paragraph or two in either one of the CD booklets that it's in. And yet I happen to play both of these back to back, and I don't know, nobody knows if there's ever going to be a part 3 or not. The story was so thin, there's so little of an actual story in the CD booklet that you don't know if there was intended on being anything else besides this guy just meeting this alien, and you don't really find out much else of what happens. And again, completely instrumental. It took 6 or 7 years for the part 2 to come out, and then Edgar passed away a couple of years after the part 2, so we don't know if he ever got to a part 3. But last year at Halloween, I happened to pull both of these out and play them. And I guess part of it is the story and the title, The Phantom Ferry, and the kind of science fiction element to the story that can easily create a Halloween association in your mind. And so I ended up playing it last Halloween, and then when I started, thinking about Halloween and getting into my Halloween mode, all of a sudden I got the desire to hear it again. And then I realized, wow, that's my newest addition. Just like happened with the Tangerine Dream Green Desert album. It wasn't necessarily intended for me to add that to my Halloween stack, but because of the time of year that I happened to listen to it, when the following year, the same season rolled around again, all of a sudden I wanted to hear Chandra Part 1 and 2 again. And then I realized, oh, this has now become a tradition, my classical Halloween tradition. So, I knew this was going to go longer than I wanted it to, and I was really trying to go as fast as I could, but I had so many CDs to show. I'm not going to do a record poll because this is, I'll do that next time. The weather cooled off here a little bit. I actually turned on the heat today for the first time, but somewhere in the temp said within the next few days it should go to be about like 82 again. It's going to get up to 82. But it's not really, right now it's not close to that. And when I first came in here I was cool, but now I'm not. Now I'm quite warm. So I guess talking over an hour helps. So, I've still got time. I've still got time to do Tales from the Garage. Sorry for being so long. That's my Halloween edition for this year. But to me, Halloween lasts all the way until well into early November. And I'll be making little mentions of Halloween probably in my future videos leading up to Halloween. But I just wanted to get this out there so I could once again show my Halloween stuff. Okay, guys. All my Halloween stuff is actually in my bedroom, so I don't have any decorations here, but I do in my other rooms. But I don't know whether you get to see them or not. That depends on the temperatures. Okay, guys, I've gone long enough. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon. Bye.
Tales from the Garage is brought to you by Monster Out. Just spray it once a day throughout your home and keeps all monsters away, even invisible ones. Say goodbye to ghoulies, goblins, gremlins, mummies, vampires, and the living dead. Not effective on witches, chicken men, or rhino girls. And by Smoky brand cigarettes. 9 out of 10 doctors recommend smoky cigarettes to their patients. Remember, gals love a smoky man. Smoky, the key to great taste. Tune in next time for more
Tales from the Garage.